There was a man who followed Jesus for 3 years and never once spoke to him. He was always there. Edge of every crowd. Behind the last row. Watching. Never pushing forward. Never calling out. Never asking for healing, though he needed it more than anyone in those crowds ever knew. His name was Caleb. And he was the man nobody saw. Not blind. Not lame. Not bleeding. His affliction had no name. No visible wound. No symptom a priest could examine. He was simply invisible. And he had been invisible so long he had forgotten he was anything else. This is not a story from the Bible. This is a story about the space between the miracles. About the people who stood close enough to touch God but never reached out. Until God reached for them. The man nobody saw. His parents died when he was 11. A fever swept through the village of Kfaratne, a nothing village, 20 houses, an hour's walk from Nazareth. It took his mother first. 3 days. Ruth was her name. She made lentil stew that filled the house with a smell Caleb could still conjure 30 years later if he closed his eyes hard enough. She sang while she worked slightly off-key, always the same psalm, and the sound of her singing was the safest sound in the world. She used to hold his face in both hands before bed. Every night. Her palms rough from grinding grain, warm from the cooking fire, smelling of cumin and wood smoke. She would hold his face and look at him, really look, the way you look at something precious, and say, "You are my sunrise." She died on a Tuesday. He held her hand. It went cold. And no one held his face again for 30 years. His father lasted 4 more days. Micah. A sandal maker. Quiet the way deep water is quiet still on the surface but vast underneath. He didn't say "I love you" in words. He said it in objects. Caleb would wake up and find things on his sleeping mat: a smooth stone from the river. A small wooden bird, roughly carved. A piece of dried fig. His father never explained these gifts. Never mentioned them. But every morning, something was there. And every morning, Caleb would hold the object and know, he was here in the night. He was thinking of me. Micah died on a Saturday. Caleb buried both of them. By himself. 11 years old. He dug the graves with a borrowed shovel that was too big for his hands. He wrapped their bodies in the only cloth he had. He didn't say any prayers because he didn't know any properly and there was no one to teach him. After the burial, he sat between the 2 mounds of dirt and waited. For what he didn't know. For someone to come. An uncle. A neighbor. A stranger. Anyone. Someone who would put their hand on his shoulder and say, "You're not alone. Come with me." No one came. He waited until the sun went down. Then he went back to the empty house and lay on his mat and stared at the ceiling and waited for morning. And in the morning there was nothing on his mat. No stone. No carved bird. No fig. That was the first day of invisible. He grew up on the edges of other people's lives. Doorways. Gutters. The spaces between market stalls where no one looked. He learned to sleep in places that belonged to no one, under bridges, in abandoned animal shelters, against the outer walls of synagogues where the stone held the day's warmth into the first hours of night. He learned to eat what was discarded. Bread too stale to sell. Fish too old for the market. Fruit with bruises that made the merchant's customers wrinkle their noses. Caleb didn't wrinkle his nose. Caleb ate. He worked when he could. Day labor. The kind of work where no one asks your name. Hauling stones at construction sites. Cleaning fish at the docks, scraping scales, pulling guts, the wet, metallic stink soaking into his hands so deep that sometimes he could smell it in his sleep. Carrying water jars for wealthy households. Loading grain onto donkeys. He was paid in food. Sometimes coins. He spoke only when work required it. Yes, how many, where? His voice thinned from disuse. Like a path through a field that no one walks, the grass grows over it, and after enough seasons you can't tell there was ever a path at all. He was not angry. That was the thing people wouldn't understand if they knew his story, which they didn't, because no one knew his story. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't resentful. He had simply accepted the way you accept that rocks are hard and water is wet, that he was the kind of person the world looked through. Not looked at. Through. As if he were made of glass. As if the light passed through him and landed on whoever was standing behind. Some people are seen. Some people are not. Caleb was not. By 30, he hadn't heard his own name spoken aloud in years. Sometimes at night, lying on whatever ground he had found, he would say it to himself. Quietly. Just above a whisper. Caleb. Just to remember it was real. Just to prove to himself, to the darkness, to whatever was listening, that the word still existed. And then one day, hauling fish baskets at the Capernaum docks, hands raw and stinking, back aching, the sun flattening everything into white, a commotion broke out. People running. Dropping their work. Shouting. The healer. The Nazarene. He's in the synagogue. Caleb followed. Not because he wanted healing. What would he ask to be healed of? You can't point to loneliness. You can't show a priest the place where invisibility lives. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't swell. It just is. He followed because the crowd was moving and he had nowhere else to be. He stood at the back. Always at the back. Because the back is where invisible people go. The front is for the bold. The middle is for the normal. The back is for the ones who aren't sure they belong in the building at all. He couldn't see much. Too many shoulders. Too much movement. But he could hear a voice. And the voice was different from any voice he had ever heard. Not louder. Not deeper, not more commanding. Warmer. The way sunlight feels after a cold night, not aggressive, not demanding, just there, filling the space, touching everything equally. He caught fragments. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. He stopped breathing. Blessed are the meek. He had been meek his entire life. Meek was the only thing he knew how to be. Meek meant you got pushed aside in the bread line. Meek meant you ate last and spoke last and slept outside. Meek meant that when you walked into a room, the room didn't change. Because the room didn't know you were there. And this voice was calling it blessed. Something stirred in his chest. Small. Fragile. Like a moth trapped in a jar. beating its wings against the glass. Not hope, he didn't have the vocabulary for hope anymore. Something smaller. Something without a name. The faintest suggestion that maybe the world was not arranged the way he had assumed. He came back the next day. Same place. Same back row. And the day after. And the day after that. He followed Jesus for 3 years. I need you to understand what 3 years means. 3 years is 1095 days. 1095 mornings waking up and choosing to follow. 1095 evenings finding a place to sleep within earshot of the camp. 1095 days of watching from a distance that never closed. 3 summers. 3 winters. 3 rainy seasons where the Galilean hillsides turned to mud and Caleb's feet blistered and his clothes rotted and he shivered through nights with no fire because fire attracts attention and attention was the one thing Caleb could not survive. He developed routines. Rituals. The architecture of obsession. He had a distance exactly 100 paces. Close enough to hear Jesus's voice when the wind was right. Far enough that no one in the crowd would register his presence. He measured it. Every time the crowd stopped, Caleb would find his position: a rock, a tree, a wall exactly 100 paces out. And he would settle. And he would watch. He had a tree. An ancient sycamore near the shore of Galilee where Jesus often taught. Caleb sat behind it so many times that the bark wore smooth against his back. He knew every knot. Every ridge. He could have found that tree in total darkness by touch alone. After the crowds left, after the last person had been healed, the last question answered, the last child blessed, Caleb would walk to the place where Jesus had stood. And he would look at the ground. At the footprints. At the marks where people had knelt. At the impressions in the dirt where the sick had lain before being healed. He would crouch. And touch the ground. As if some residue of what had happened there might transfer through the soil into his fingers. It never did. He memorized Jesus's voice. Not just the words, the rhythms. The way he paused before saying something important, the way his voice dropped when he was speaking to someone in pain, lower, softer, as if the words themselves were trying to be gentle. The way he laughed, and he did laugh, more than the stories usually tell, a real laugh, sudden, surprised, the laugh of someone who genuinely delighted in people. Caleb could close his eyes and hear that voice anytime. It played in his head like his mother's off-key singing, a soundtrack that was always there, underneath everything. He saw miracles. He was there when the paralytic's friends tore through the roof. He watched through a window pressed against the outer wall, standing on a stone he had placed there for exactly this purpose. He saw the mat lowering through the broken ceiling. He saw the man stand up. He saw the crowd's faces open-mouthed, tears, hands raised. And he saw Jesus looking at the man with that expression that Caleb had catalogued and studied and could not name, the expression of someone who saw not the paralysis but the person. He was there when the bleeding woman touched the hem. He was in the crowd closer than usual that day, because the crowd was so thick that his 100-pace distance had been compressed. He felt the surge when it happened, a wave of movement, gasps, someone falling. He didn't see her face. He saw the aftermath, a woman kneeling, weeping, and Jesus saying words Caleb couldn't quite hear but would later learn were, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." "Daughter." Jesus had called a stranger daughter. As if she belonged to him. As if she had always belonged to him. Caleb thought about that word for weeks. He was there when the 5,000 were fed. On a hillside behind a boulder. He didn't eat, he was too far back, and the disciples distributing the bread and fish didn't see him. Invisible people don't get fed. He watched others eat. He watched them break bread with their hands and put it in their mouths and chew with expressions of astonishment because the bread kept appearing and kept appearing. His stomach growled. He pressed his hand against it to silence it. He was there when Lazarus walked out of the tomb. On the hillside, behind an olive tree. He heard the command, "Lazarus, come out." And the voice that day was different from any other day. It was the voice of someone who had authority over the thing that terrified Caleb most. Not death. Loneliness. Because death was just the final loneliness, the one where you disappear and no one notices because no one noticed when you were here. But if a man could be called out of a tomb by name, if a dead man could be seen and summoned, then maybe an invisible man could be seen too. He pushed the thought down. He was good at that. 30 years of practice. The breaking didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. Over weeks. Small fractures that Caleb sealed shut each time, the way you press a crack in a clay jar and convince yourself it will hold. The first fracture, a day in Bethsaida, Jesus was healing a line of people. One after another. Touching their faces, their hands, their eyes. Caleb was at his usual distance behind a low wall, watching through a gap in the stones. And a thought entered his mind uninvited: he touches everyone. Everyone who comes to him, he touches. When was the last time anyone touched me? He couldn't remember. He searched his memory backwards through the years, backwards through the decades, and he could not find a single instance of human contact since his mother's hands on his face when he was 11. 19 years without being touched. He pressed the crack shut. Moved on. The second fracture, a week later. Jesus was teaching, and the crowd was large, and Caleb was pushed accidentally, by a man backing up to make room from his position at the edge into the middle of the crowd. For a terrifying moment he was surrounded. Bodies on all sides. Shoulders brushing his. The heat of other people. The smell of them, sweat, bread, wool, life. And then the man who had pushed him turned and looked at him. Looked through him. The man's eyes landed on Caleb's face for a half second and then moved on, scanning for something more interesting, finding it, turning away. The half second of almost being seen followed by the confirmation that he wasn't was worse than not being looked at all. He retreated to his 100 paces. He didn't eat that night. The third fracture, the day that broke him. It was near Jericho. A vast crowd. Jesus was passing through. And a blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the road, screaming, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The crowd told him to be quiet. Shut up. Stop screaming. You're embarrassing yourself. And Bartimaeus screamed louder. Louder than the crowd. Louder than the embarrassment. Louder than the shame. And Jesus stopped. The entire procession halted because one blind beggar refused to be silent. Jesus said, "Call him." And they called Bartimaeus. And the blind man threw off his cloak, threw away the only thing he owned, and stumbled forward. And Jesus healed him. Caleb watched this from behind a cluster of people. And a thought entered him that he could not push down. Bartimaeus screamed. And Jesus stopped. For 3 years Caleb had been silent. For 3 years he had watched from 100 paces. For 3 years he had never screamed, never called out, never made a single sound. And Jesus had never stopped for him. Because Bartimaeus was brave enough to scream. And Caleb was not. The thought was unbearable. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. Caleb had spent 3 years waiting to be noticed. Waiting for Jesus to look past the crowds and see the invisible man behind the last row. Waiting for his turn. And his turn had never come. Because turns don't come to people who don't get in line. He walked away from the crowd that day. Found a place behind a hill, and sat in the dirt and pressed his hands against his eyes and whispered, "I can't scream. I don't know how. I forgot how to make myself heard. I don't even know if I have a voice anymore." The crack was too big this time. He couldn't seal it. 2 more weeks. He kept following. But something was different now. The distance that had been comfortable for 3 years was suffocating. The routines that had structured his invisible life felt like chains. The 100 paces felt like 100 miles. And the worst part, the part that was killing him, was this: Jesus kept touching people. Every day. Hands on faces. Hands on eyes. Hands on shoulders. Arms around children. Feet washed by weeping women. The man was always touching and being touched, surrounded by contact, wrapped in the physical proof that human beings were real to each other. And Caleb watched. From behind his tree. With his smooth bark back and his memorized voice and his 19 years of no one's skin against his own. He began talking to himself. Not out loud, silently, in his head. But the conversations grew. Arguments. You could walk up there. Right now. Just walk up and stand in the line, and when he gets to you. And say, "What, heal me of nothing, I'm not sick, I'm not blind, I'm not bleeding, I'm just no one." He heals everyone. He turns no one away. He heals the sick. The broken. People with real problems. Real wounds. Not a man whose only wound is that he's alone. Being alone is a wound. Not the kind he fixes. Not the kind anyone fixes. This is just what I am. This is just how the world works for people like me. You don't know that. You've never asked. I can't ask. Why? Because what if he looks through me too? What if I walk up to him and he looks at me and his eyes go past me the way everyone's eyes go past me? What if even God doesn't see me? The thought stopped him every time. The fear at the core of everything, not that Jesus couldn't see him. That Jesus could and would choose not to. That even God would confirm what the world had been telling him for 30 years, you are not worth seeing. As long as he stayed 100 paces away, that fear remained theoretical. Survivable. If he walked forward and it became real, if he stood before Jesus and Jesus looked through him, he would not survive it. So he stayed. And the crack widened. The night. It was somewhere in Galilee. A hillside. Jesus had been teaching all day. The crowd dispersed at sunset. Disciples set up camp. Fires. Bedrolls. The quiet sounds of evening. Caleb was where he always was. Behind his rocks. 100 paces. No fire. But tonight the camp was closer than usual. And tonight the wind carried sound perfectly. Every word from the fire reached him as if he were sitting beside it. He could hear the disciples laughing. Peter telling a story, something about a fish, everyone groaning. John saying something quiet that made Jesus laugh. The clink of cups. The tear of bread, the crackle of fire. The sounds of belonging. Caleb had his bread. His water. His ground. His stars. And for 1095 nights, this had been enough. Watching had been enough. Hearing had been enough. Being near had been enough. Tonight it wasn't. Tonight the sound of other people's laughter was a blade. Tonight the smell of their fire carried on the wind, the smell of warmth, of community, of home was acid in his lungs. Tonight the distance between his darkness and their light was not 100 paces. It was everything. He ate his bread. It tasted like dust. He drank his water. It tasted like nothing. He lay down. He looked at the stars. And the dam broke. Not from one wave. From the accumulated weight of everything behind it. 30 years of water pressing against a wall that had held and held and held, and tonight could not hold any more. He cried. Not the way he had learned to cry, silently, his face in his arm, swallowing the sounds because sounds attract attention. Tonight he forgot to be silent. Tonight the sounds came out of him like something being torn from the ground by its roots, ragged, ugly, animal sounds that he couldn't control and didn't try to. He cried for his mother. For her hands on his face. For you are my sunrise, and the way those words had sustained him like stored grain for years and then decades, and then finally ran out, and he had been starving ever since. He cried for his father. For the small gifts on his sleeping mat. For the carved bird and the smooth stone and the dried fig and the language of love that required no words and no words could replace. He cried for Hannah, a girl he had loved at 17. From a distance. She had married a potter's son without ever knowing Caleb existed. He had watched the wedding from behind a wall. He didn't blame her. How do you love someone you've never seen? He cried for Bartimaeus. For a blind man who had the courage to scream. For the voice Caleb didn't have. For the cry he couldn't make. For 3 years of silence in the presence of the one person who might have heard him. He cried for the space on his sleeping mat where nothing had been left for 30 years. And he didn't hear the footsteps. Caleb. His body went rigid. The crying stopped, not because the grief stopped, but because terror replaced it. The reflexive terror of being found. Of being seen in the ugliest, most broken, most exposed moment of his life. He scrambled backward. Away from the voice. His back hit the rock behind him. His hands clawed at the dirt. His eyes, wild, swollen, blind with tears, searched the darkness. A figure. 3 meters away. Jesus. Standing in the starlight. Alone. No disciples. No torch. Just him. And Caleb's first instinct, the instinct of 30 years, was to run. Don't he held up his hands. Palms out. The universal gesture of defense. Don't come closer. I wasn't. You were crying. I'm fine. I'm no one, I shouldn't be here. I'll leave. I'll go. He tried to stand. His legs wouldn't hold him. He slipped in the dirt and fell sideways and pressed himself against the rock as if he could melt into it. I'm not someone you need to. I don't need anything. I'm not sick. I'm not broken. I'm not. Caleb. Just his name. But said in a way that no one had said it since his mother. Not as information. As recognition. The way you say the name of someone you have known for a long time and are glad to see. How do you know my name? His voice was barely a voice. Gravel and tears and air. I've always known your name. Caleb pressed harder against the rock. I know you need to leave. Go back to the camp. There are sick people who need you. Important people. I'm just. You keep saying what you're not. Stop telling me what you're not. Tell me what you are. Silence. The stars. The distant fire. The insect chorus. And the sound of a man breathing fast, shallow, the breathing of a trapped animal. I don't know what I am, Caleb whispered. Jesus didn't move closer. He didn't sit down. He stood. And waited. The way a man stands outside a locked door, not forcing it, not breaking it, just standing. Present. Patient. There. I've followed you for 3 years, Caleb said. He didn't plan to say it. It came out the way air comes out when you puncture something sealed. I know. You knew you all this time. Every crowd. Every teaching. Every miracle. Behind the last row. Behind the rocks. Behind the sycamore tree, the one near the shore with the smooth bark. Caleb's chest contracted. You knew about the tree. You've worn the bark smooth with your back. I've watched you sit there and listen. I've watched you walk to the places where I stood after the crowds left. I've watched you touch the ground. The words hit him like blows. Not painful, devastating. The specific, unbearable devastation of being seen when you have built your entire existence around not being seen. Then why? His voice cracked. Shattered. If you knew I was there for 3 years, why didn't you? He couldn't finish. Why didn't you come? It hung in the air between them. The question of his life. The question underneath every other question. Not just about Jesus. About everyone. His uncle who didn't come after the funeral. The neighbors who looked through him. The girl who never saw him. The world that kept moving without registering that he existed. Why didn't anyone come? Because you weren't ready, Jesus said. I've been ready for 30 years. You've been watching for 30 years. That's not the same thing. What's the difference? Watching is what you do from 100 paces. Ready is what happens when you stop believing 100 paces is where you belong. Caleb felt something collapse inside him. A wall. A very old wall. I'm afraid, he said. And the admission, that single, 2-word admission, cost him more than anything he had ever said. Of what? That you'll look through me. The way everyone looks through me. That I'll walk up to you and your eyes will go past me and I'll finally know that even God doesn't see me." Jesus was quiet. "Then, what was the last thing your mother said to you?" The question came from nowhere. Or from everywhere. Caleb felt the air change. "She what?" "Your mother. Ruth. The night before she died. She held your face." "What did she say?" No one knew this. No one on earth knew this. There had been no one else in the room. "She said, 'You are my son, rise.' And you've been waiting 30 years for someone to say it again." Caleb couldn't see. Everything was blurred. Tears, starlight, the figure standing 3 meters away, all of it swimming. "Caleb, I need you to hear me. Not with your ears, you've been hearing me for 3 years. With the part of you that remembers your mother's hands. I can't. You can. I'm nobody. I have nothing to. You are not nobody. You have never been nobody. The world didn't see you, but the world is blind, Caleb. The world misses most of what matters. The world looked through you because the world looks through everything that isn't loud and bright and demanding." Jesus took one step closer. Just one. "But I am not the world." Caleb pressed himself against the rock. His body was a fist. Every muscle clenched. Every instinct screaming, "Don't trust this. Don't believe this. You will be seen and then unseen, and the second time will kill you. I watched you cut your hand when you were 13, Jesus said. Hauling stones too heavy for a boy your size. The sharp edge caught your left palm. You bled for an hour." Caleb looked at his left hand. The scar was there. A thin white line across the palm. 30 years old. You tore a strip from your tunic and wrapped it yourself. And went back to work. Because there was no one to tell you to stop. That was nothing. A small cut. It was not nothing. You were a child. You were hurt. And you were alone. And that matters. Why does that matter? It was 30 years ago. Because you still believe that your pain doesn't count. That your wounds aren't real because they don't bleed where people can see. And I am telling you, I who see everything, who miss nothing, your wound is the deepest wound in this crowd. Deeper than the blind man's darkness. Deeper than the leper's skin. Because they knew they were suffering. You don't even know. Caleb was shaking. You think you're invisible. You think you're the one person the universe forgot to include. But Caleb, I left a camp of 12 men tonight. 12 men who need me. 12 men who depend on me. And I walked 100 paces in the dark. Because I heard you. I wasn't even calling you. You've been calling me for 3 years. Every time you sat behind that tree. Every time you touched the ground where I stood, every time you whispered your own name at night to make sure it still existed. You were calling me. You just didn't know it. Jesus was closer now. 6 feet. Caleb could see his face in the starlight. And in that face, in those eyes that Caleb had studied from 100 paces for 1,000 days, he saw something that took the last brick out of the last wall. He saw himself. Reflected in Jesus's eyes. Not as he saw himself, not the invisible man, the nobody, the glass person the light passed through. He saw himself the way Jesus saw him. And it was different. Completely different. In Jesus's eyes he was solid. Real. Present. A person with weight and substance and a name that mattered. "Come here," Jesus said. Caleb didn't move. "I can't." "Why?" "Because if I come to you and you're real, if this is real, then the last 30 years were what? Were unnecessary. All of it. The hiding. The 100 paces. The silence. If you saw me this whole time, then I was never invisible. And if I was never invisible, then I chose this. I chose to hide. And that means..." His voice broke. "That means I did this to myself." Jesus closed the distance. Not all of it. He stopped an arm's length away. Close enough to touch. But he didn't touch. You didn't do this to yourself. The world broke you. Your parents' death broke you. 11 years old and no one came. That wasn't your fault. That was the world failing you. And every year after every year of invisibility was a wound on top of a wound. You didn't choose to hide, Caleb. You learned to. Because hiding was the only way to survive. He held out his hand. But you don't need to survive anymore. Caleb looked at the hand. The hand that had healed the blind and raised the dead and broken bread that fed thousands. The hand that every desperate person in Israel was reaching for. Reaching toward him. He looked at it for a long time. And then he reached back. Slowly. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely control it. His fingers stretched out and stopped. An inch from Jesus's palm. Hovering. The last inch. The distance between everything he had been and everything he might become. Jesus didn't grab his hand. Didn't close the gap. He waited. His palm open. His eyes steady. The choice had to be Caleb's. And Caleb, the invisible man, the nobody, the man who had not touched another human being in 19 years, closed the inch. Their hands met. And Caleb felt it. Not a surge of power. Not lightning. Not the dramatic whoosh of the healing stories. Something quieter. Something that started at the point of contact, palm against palm, skin against skin, and spread. Warmth. But not physical warmth. The warmth of being held. The warmth of existing in someone else's awareness. The warmth of his mother's hands on his face 30 years ago, the same warmth, the exact same warmth, as if it had been stored somewhere and was now being returned. His knees buckled. He went down, not falling, kneeling. His hand still in Jesus's hand. His forehead dropped against their clasped fingers. And he wept. Different weeping than before. Before the crying had been grief. Loneliness. Rage at the void. This weeping was something else. This was the weeping of a man feeling himself become real. The way an infant cries when it takes its first breath, not in pain but in the shock of being. You are not invisible, Jesus said. You have never been invisible. I have seen every day. Every night. Every meal eaten alone. Every morning with nothing on your mat. His other hand came to rest on Caleb's head. And I am telling you, your mother was right. Caleb looked up. His face destroyed. Open. Defenseless. You are my son, rise too. They sat together until dawn. Jesus didn't preach. He didn't teach. He asked Caleb about his mother and his father. And Caleb told him the lentil stew, the off-key singing, the carved wooden bird, the smooth stones on the sleeping mat. He told him about Hannah, the girl he loved at 17 from behind a wall. About the sunrise in Jericho that was so beautiful he wept. About the dog that followed him for 3 weeks and then disappeared. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of things that only matter to the person who lived them. And Jesus listened. Completely. As if these stories about a dog and a sunrise and a girl behind a wall were as important as any sermon he had ever given. And maybe they were. Because maybe the whole reason Jesus walked 100 paces in the dark was not to heal Caleb's body or forgive his sins or teach him theology, but to hear his story. To let him speak into ears that would not look away. To let him exist in someone else's attention for the first time in 30 years. Near dawn, Caleb fell quiet. The words were spent. 30 years of stored up language emptied in a single night. But the emptiness didn't feel empty. It felt clean. Like a room that has been sealed and dark for decades and someone has opened the windows and the light is painful but the air is new. Jesus stood. The sky was gray at the edges. What happens now? Caleb asked. His voice was new, still rough, still thin, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before. A current. Like a stream that has been dry for years and the first trickle of water is beginning to move through the stones. Now you learn to be seen. I don't know how. You don't have to know. You just have to stop hiding. And if the world looks through me again, it will. The world is still the world. But you will know, and this knowing will change everything, that the world is not the last word on who you are. Jesus pulled Caleb to his feet. They stood face to face. There are people like you in every village. In every crowd. At the back of every room. People whose names no one speaks. People who whisper their own names at night to remember they exist. Find them. And do what? Walk to them, sit with them. Ask their name. Hear their story. That's not a miracle. Jesus's eyes held something vast, wider than the lake, deeper than the night they had just passed through. It is the only miracle that matters. Caleb stood still. The morning light was coming. The camp was stirring behind them. In a few minutes the world would resume, the crowds, the sick, the desperate, the visible. And Caleb would walk into it. Not behind it. Not at the edge of it. Into it. But not yet. I don't know who I am now, he said. For 30 years I was the invisible man. If I'm not that, who am I? You are the man who was found, Jesus said. And now you are the man who finds. He walked home. A different road. A different pace. Not the shuffle of a man with nowhere to be, the stride of someone with somewhere to go. In his hand he held a small stone. Ordinary. Jesus had picked it up during the night absently, while listening to Caleb talk about his father, and had held it while Caleb spoke. And when the talking was done, he had pressed it into Caleb's palm. A small thing. Left without explanation. The way Caleb's father used to leave things on his sleeping mat. The road was busy. People moving in both directions. Merchants. Families. Soldiers. The usual current of human traffic that Caleb had always moved through like a ghost. He saw them differently now. Not as a crowd, as individuals. That woman carrying water, her shoulders were uneven, one higher than the other, from years of the same weight on the same side. That boy leading a donkey, his feet were bare and cut and he was limping slightly on his left foot. That old man sitting under a tree. Caleb stopped. The old man was sitting by the side of the road. Not begging. Not waiting. Just sitting. The way people sit when they have nowhere to be and no one expecting them. His eyes were unfocused. His hands were still. He had the particular stillness of someone who has been motionless for so long that the world has stopped registering their presence. Caleb recognized that stillness. He knew it from the inside. He left the road. He walked to the man. He sat down. In the dirt. Beside him. The way Jesus had sat beside him. "What's your name?" The man startled. His eyes focused slowly, as if coming back from somewhere far away. He looked at Caleb with the expression Caleb knew better than any expression in the world, the shock of being addressed. The confusion of being seen. "Simeon," the man said. "Simeon. I'm Caleb. I know you." "No. But I'd like to hear your story. If you want to tell it." The old man stared. His mouth worked, not speaking, processing. The idea that a stranger would sit in the dirt and ask for his story was so foreign that his mind needed time to accept it. And then something changed in his face. The way a landscape changes when clouds part, not new, just revealed. The loneliness cracked. The weariness softened, and beneath it, beneath decades of being unseen, something surfaced. Relief. "No one has asked me that in a very long time," Simeon said. "I know," Caleb said. "I know exactly how long it's been." And the old man began to speak. And Caleb listened. The way Jesus listened to him. Completely. The fire has gone out. But on a road in Galilee, two men are sitting in the dirt. One is an old man who forgot he had a story. The other is a man who was invisible until last night. No blind eyes were opened. No lame legs straightened. No water turned to wine. A name was spoken. A story was heard. Two people who had been invisible to the world became visible to each other. And if you don't think that's a miracle, you have never been the one nobody sees. Jesus didn't heal Caleb. Not in the way the world understands healing. He didn't fix a body or cast out a demon or reverse a disease. He did something harder. He walked 100 paces in the dark because he heard someone who wasn't calling. He sat in the dirt with someone who had nothing to offer. He said a name that no one had spoken in years. And that was enough. Not just for Caleb. For Simeon. And whoever Simeon tells. And whoever that person finds on the side of a road. A chain of seeing. A chain of names spoken aloud. It started when God left a campfire because he heard crying in the dark. And that chain has never stopped. It's reaching you right now. You watching this. The one who knows what the back row feels like. The one who wonders if anyone sees. The one who whispers their own name at night. You are not invisible. You have never been invisible. The one who walked 100 paces for Caleb has already walked farther for you. He knows your name. He's seen the scar. He's heard the crying you thought no one heard. And he's not 100 paces away. He's here. He's been here the whole time. Look up. Shall we continue?